We are live again on yet another day to narrate some more awesome young adult fantasy. I am narrating Mildred's Resistance. We are on chapter 22. This is a book that I wrote years ago, and I am re-narrating today. I'm also buying a little time because the UPS driver is driving by and my dogs are going to bark in a second. If you haven't purchased your copy yet and you want a copy, then just go to katiecrossbooks.com. It will also be available on all retailers like Audible and stuff, but you can get it that way, like fully edited, proofed, beautified without all of the stops in between. And with that said, let's go ahead and get started on chapter 22. Woo! Chapter 22, The New Assistant.
Rotten brat,
Stefan screamed.
Get back here and build the fire.
A young fireboy darted into the hallway from Stefan's office, eyes wide. He sprinted past Mildred, dropping an armful of logs in his haste. She gazed down at the strewn pieces of wood with a sigh.
Wonderful,
she muttered, collecting the firewood back together with an incantation. Telling Stefan she was his new assistant would be downright dangerous.
Where's my firewood?
Mildred stepped into the doorway to find Stefan standing in the middle of his office. His shock-white hair stood up on end, and loose skin hung off his neck like a waddle. His sleeves were pushed up to his elbows, his jacket off, and shirt askew. A watch that clearly didn't work dangled from a chain out of an inner pocket.
If you weren't...
Oh, it's wrong. I started the wrong voice there. Hi, everybody.
If you weren't such a terror, they wouldn't be afraid of you,
Mildred said, sending the logs to the fireplace with a spell. Stefan regarded her with deep suspicion.
You're that ornery librarian that won't work. I'm still going to file a complaint about you. I was that librarian. Was?
His voice peaked with hope.
Were you fired? You came to apologize? I'm your new assistant.
A current of air whistled past Mildred. The room blurred, and she found herself out in the hallway with the door slammed shut in her face.
Shove me outside with magic, will you?
She muttered, pushing her sleeves up.
Two can play that game.
Mildred transported back into the office with an invisible protection shield around her.
I don't need an assistant, he bellowed. Leave. An attitude change is what you need,
she said, breezing past him. He tried to send her outside again, but his incantation fizzled into sparks.
You can cast all the
Cast. I said cast. It should be cast. Hey, everybody.
You can cast all the incantations to get rid of me that you want, Mildred said. But I don't intend on leaving just because you're childish. This is my only shot to get out of the library, and I'm going to make the best of it. Childish, he yelled. You're the child.
She stepped over a pile of scattered books and an old dinner tray. The half-open window admitted message after message, soaring at such frantic speeds that they looked like birds having seizures in flight.
Your office is a disaster,
she said, nose wrinkling when she pulled a sock off the back of his desk chair. I want to check that cadence. Back of his desk chair. The way desk comes out, the SK kind of barely forms a list. She said, nose wrinkling when she pulled a sock off the back of his desk chair. She rolled her eyes, a headache already forming at the base of her neck. This would certainly prove to be the longest day of her life.
We have a few things to discuss before I sign a contract to work with you. Get out of here. Be quiet, she said. You may speak to me like an adult, but you may not yell at me.
I think it's made a ch sound. Yeah, it goes adult ch. It's very subtle, but you can hear it.
You may speak to me like an adult, but you may not yell at me.
Stefan's nostrils flared, but he calmed himself for the moment.
Your career is about
to be yanked. Okay. Stefan's nostrils flared, but he calmed himself in the moment.
Your career is about to be yanked out from under your feet if we don't do something about it, Mildred said. Would you like to starve on the streets? I've done nothing wrong, he shouted, balling his hands into fists. Except serve an ungrateful network, that.
She cast a silencing incantation for a moment of peace. His lips continued to move, but no sound came from his mouth.
Yes,
Mildred said, drawing herself to her full height, which really wasn't much taller than his.
I just said a silencing spell on you because of your disrespectful and, quite frankly, embarrassing mouth. Now, listen to me. I'm your last shot at an assistant. If you don't shape up, Donovan will fire you, replace you with one of his nitwit friends, and you'll die alone. After an entire lifetime of hard work, is that how you want it all to end?
He growled deep in his throat in response, but averted his eyes. The moment of silence gave Mildred a chance to regain her scattered thoughts and compose herself.
I'll remove the incantation if you promise not to yell. Do we have an agreement?
Stefan shot her another murderous glare, waded to his chair through piles of papers, and fell into the fluffy cushions. In the wake of his tantrum, he looked very old. Mildred took it as a yes and whispered a spell reversal.
I want breakfast.
That sort of comes out loud. So I like to check to make sure it doesn't sound too loud. It seemed okay. He said. Mildred blinked.
Breakfast? Yes, he snapped. 2 eggs, a cup of coffee, and potatoes cut up into little squares, with tomatoes. Well, I want to be the assistant to a respectful council member. We can work something out if you calm that infernal temper and ask me politely. Order me breakfast. No.
After 5 minutes of repartee, during which neither would back down, Stefan mumbled something faintly resembling a please, although she distinctly heard the words. Okay. Stefan mumbled something faintly resembling a plea. Oh, I timed it wrong. Mumbled something faintly resembling a
please,
although she distinctly heard the words "Dotty bat" follow it. Ignoring his attitude, Mildred wrote a request on a scrap of messenger paper and sent it to the kitchen with a spell.
I want it clear,
Stefan said, pointing at her.
I don't like assistants. Stop trying to get a competent one years ago. You're not worth my time. That's fine. I don't want to be your assistant either. We'll both do something we don't want and hope that something good comes out of it. My first order of business will be to establish what you need done. Let's start with an organized list, then we can get to cleaning this place,
she said, walking in a circle around his cluttered desk, waving a misplaced hanky out of her way with a flick of her wrist. It smacked him in the face.
I refuse to work in such a horrid environment. Don't touch my desk. We can discuss my wages next week, once you've seen how I work.
She extracted 2 books from a mound of papers and sent them to the bookshelves.
Please keep in mind that I'm your assistant, not your nanny.
The room began showing signs of life for the first time in what had likely been months. The fire blazed a little higher. Papers shuffled on the desk, sorting themselves into neat piles. Books continued to fly from the floor and onto the wall. Onto the wall? Oh, shelves, probably. Okay. That makes sense. Books continued to fly from the floor and onto the wall. He grabbed a novel as it sped past and opened it to the middle. Before he could properly start reading, the book snapped shut and flew to Mildred's waiting hand.
You may read after we've discussed what needs to be done.
His squawks of protest fell on deaf ears. Mildred collected her supplies and a chair.
I've already noted extensive housekeeping,
she said, unfurling a blank scroll. Instead of answering, he turned away and stared at the fire with a glower. Mildred added,
contact library students to notify of canceled classes for the next week,
to the list. She'd need all the time she could get her fingers on. Oh, I said that wrong. To figure out. To the list. She'd need all the time she could get to figure out her new job. Surely they'd understand, and maybe even appreciate a break. Stefan still hadn't spoken a single word.
If you don't tell me what you want done, I'll just do what I want,
Mildred said, hoping he didn't see her heart slamming in her throat. If he knew how uncomfortable she was, she'd never gain the upper hand.
Cookies,
he said, turning to face her with his wild hair flying out in all directions. The loose skin under his jaw wobbled whenever he spoke.
Excuse me?
He tucked his wrinkled hands, speckled with liver spots, into the 2 small pockets of his vest and puffed out his chest.
I want you to make sure I have a plate of cookies, a glass of cold milk, and plenty of firewood to keep me warm. Also, ensure that my laundry is completed every week. I'm not your wife. No, you're my assistant and must do what I say. I must not. Then you're fired. You can't fire me the first day, she said. I'm guaranteed a trial period of 1 month. Don't get the wrong cookies, he mumbled with a scowl.
Mildred clenched her jaw at the idea of doting on him like a child. She hadn't survived years of learning magic, doing homework until all hours of the night, and working as a librarian to dote on a grumpy old man.
I'll note reviewing tax records, she said, forcing a calm tone. When did you last meet with your coven leaders? I love gardening, he continued, as if she hadn't spoken. So you need to make sure that my pile of books on plants never falls below 7. I've read everything in the gardening section, so you have to find something else like it.
So if you've noticed, when I voice Stefan, I turn my face away from the microphone so that I can get the intensity that I want without the volume. So I don't speak right into the microphone, so that the sound actually remains the same throughout, no matter whose voice it is.
You probably met with the coven leaders last year then. Lovely. And don't forget to order my hot chocolate in the morning. I'll order your hot chocolate as soon as you tell me something worthwhile,
Mildred countered testily, feeling the last remnants of her control fading.
I'm here to assist you in your business as a council member, not in your creature comforts. It's an insult to assume I want anything to do with your laundry.
His bushy eyebrows drooped until they nearly covered his dark eyes.
I won't help you unless I'm taken care of.
They stared at each other, mute with tension.
Chocolate chip for the basic weekday, he said. But every weekend I'll want snickerdoodles. Don't forget to request extra marshmallows in my hot chocolate and have my slippers replaced by the end of the week.
Mildred itched to set a hex on him, and she refrained only because an envelope short. There we go. Mildred itched to set a hex. There we go. Set a hex. Who's here? Hi, Jessica. Thanks for coming in. It's so fun to have you. Oh, thanks for all the hearts. You're awesome. Look at all these people coming through. So fun to have you here, Jess. Thanks for hanging out. I'm going to see if I can say this better. Mildred itched to set a hex on him. There we go. This is a tough one. The T's and the D's. Mildred itched to set a hex on him, and she refrained only because an envelope soared underneath the door and hovered between them. A wax seal in the shape of a dragon indicated the letter had come from the High Priest's office. Mildred plucked it from the air.
It's a notice,
she said, frowning.
The Esbot is tonight.
The Esbot?
Yes.
Ha! He hooted, looking altogether like an owl with his erratic hair and excited eyes.
Good luck with it, you intolerable monster. You look like a fool tonight.
With that, he snapped his mouth shut, folded his arms, and refused to say another word. Mildred walked into the council room behind Stefan that evening, her nerves as frayed as an old string. She would have happily throttled him and his stubborn attitude if the idea of failing on her first day of work, not work day. Hey, everybody. Had the idea of... Oh my gosh, I lost my spot. It's a problem with looking at TikTok, huh? She would have happily throttled him and his stubborn attitude if the idea of failing on her first day of work wasn't so repulsive. There we go. You guys, this happens. I just get into the groove and then I knock out of it. Repulsive. Her repeated pleas for help to Stella and Evelyn kept returning unanswered. Wherever they were, the letters weren't able to get through. She fudged her way through the entire day, trying to make sense of tax ledgers, boundary documents, and property disputes. Stefan adamantly refused to speak, so Mildred ignored him, organizing the office and making as much noise as possible whenever he tried to nap. "Welcome," Porter said with a warm smile that was very nearly Mildred's undoing. He checked her wrist for the Esbot mark and was about to ask a question, no doubt to see how it was going, but stopped when he saw the murderous look on her face. Without saying a word, he patted her on the shoulder. "I'll try to speak with him. Don't worry, Mildred. Give it time." All right, I'm pretty sure that's a good Porter, but I'm going to go back and just listen because I hadn't voiced him yet today, and he has a very raspy, droll kind of... I've an early... So it is different. "I'll try to speak with him. Don't worry, Mildred. Give it time." So he's a little different. It's a little bit different, but that difference makes a big difference. All right, we're just going to revoice. Sorry, I hit something on my work session. He patted her on the shoulder. "I'll try to speak with him. Don't worry, Mildred. Give it time." He moved to check Stefan's wrist. She clutched a thick scroll to her chest and stepped to the wall where she could wait for her friends to arrive. Throughout the day, she'd taken random notes from the papers she'd sorted, but the figures and conclusions meant next to nothing to her. All the same, it felt better to have something with her for the meeting. Salvation soon sashayed into the council room. Stella, who walked just behind Rand so she could see where his hands were at all times, stopped once she saw Mildred.
Millie?
She mouthed. Let's begin. Hold on, I gotta do Donovan. Okay, so that voice was Donovan. My worry is that I voiced him a little too closely. Donovan's a high priest.
To the new assistant to the high priestess. Let's begin.
See, he sounds fairly close to like Porter. As long as they're separate, it's okay.
Let's begin,
Donovan called, heaving his massive body onto a chair. Onto his chair. We're gonna start that over.
Millie?
She mouthed.
Let's begin,
Donovan called, heaving his massive... Oh my gosh, you guys. Oh, I hate it when I have to redo it 3 times.
Millie?
She mouthed.
Let's begin,
Donovan called, heaving his massive body onto his chair, a discernible redness in his eyes.
Seal the doors.
Mildred had been so distracted she hadn't even noticed how full the council room had become. Stella joined Mildred's side, grabbed her arm, and sat next to her.
What's going on?
Stella whispered, glancing at Stefan over Mildred's shoulder. His eyes were closed and his mouth open in a dissonant snore.
I was hired as Stefan's assistant this morning,
Mildred said, running a hand over her face.
Stella, it's been such a nightmare. He refuses to tell me anything and has tried to curse me at least 10 times. What do I do? What does Donovan expect?
Stella pressed her lips together.
You'll have to give the first report,
she said, monitoring Donovan out of the corner of her eye. Councilmember Terry stood for the invocation of blessings. Stella motioned for Mildred to be quiet, but reached for a nearby quill while Terry called down powers of wisdom and clarity. She took Mildred's hand and wrote on the back of it. Sorry, there was a change that I wasn't expecting. His hands and wrote on the back of it.
Middle Covens,
Donovan said the moment Terry finished, glaring from underneath his fatty eyebrows.
Report.
All right, hold on really quick. So the problem here, it's not a problem. The thing here is that Stefan and Donovan have... Stefan and Donovan have fairly similar voices, and they're going to be talking next to each other for a second. So Donovan is much raspier. So I listen to them back and forth in the snippets that I have. I listen to them back and forth so that I know how to make them sound very different within like the conversation. So Stefan is a lot more... He enunciates a lot more clearly, like, I want it on the pronunciate, or the blah, blah, blah. Like, his enunciation is much better, where Donovan is more raspy. So as I go into this conversation, I just have to make sure that I really emphasize that. So Donovan has that more guttural raspy, where Stefan is going to have a little bit of a raspy, but he's going to enunciate.
My new assistant would love to report,
Stefan said with glee, then added under his breath,
See if you're so confident now, Margaret? This is what you'll need to go over,
Stella whispered, shoving Mildred's hand back.
Make it up if you have to. Just stand up and get it over with. Try to appear confident.
Mildred's heart slammed in her chest. The pressure of sitting amongst so many influential witches left her nearly paralyzed. She didn't have the time or knowledge to prepare for such a meeting. She didn't even know the names of the coven leaders in the middle covens.
Well,
Donovan snapped, his jowls wiggling.
What's your report? Stand up,
Stella whispered, pinching her elbow.
Hurry!
Mildred rose to find her knees shaking.
I will report for the middle covens. Well, will you?
Sorry. Whew. It, just hurt my throat right there.
Well, will you?
Donovan asked.
Well, what's your name then?
The sheer injustice of his mocking, as well as the stifled titters coming from around the room, made Mildred white-hot with anger. She was a professional. They weren't supposed to mock her like they were all still school children. They were all still school children. I'm gonna listen to that. Oh, it actually came out great. That's like a tricky run. Like they were all still school children.
My name is Mildred Graham. What's your problem? Report already. I just started as Stefan's assistant this morning. To be honest, I don't care if you started 5 years ago. Just give your report and be done. I have a meeting after this.
Donovan growled, but his eyes slipped to Rand, who grinned. She suspected that Donovan's meeting had nothing to do with business, and more to do with the popular pastime of boxing. The words Stella had scribbled on her hand were of little help. The wet ink had begun to run, but she managed to make the words out. Changes, expenses, needs. Mildred scanned the list and realized with another flutter of panic that she still had no idea what their changes, expenses, or needs would be. She willed herself to ignore the gossipy murmurs in the room. She'd not lose her future because of a grumpy curmudgeon and a surly, immature high priest who cared more about gambling than the state of the covens. She set her fingertips on the table in front of her to gain some balance.
I will report what I know, Your Highness, which isn't much considering I just started this morning. The Middle Covens are an unmitigated disaster. Would you be quiet?
Stefan cried, whacking her with his cane. She caught it in her hand without looking. I had a little pause there. I didn't like. Looks like we had someone else come in. I saw some hearts. Oh, thank you so much. So cool to see you. Stefan cried, whacking her with his cane. She caught it in her hand without looking and transformed it into a pencil, which she tucked behind her ear. Chortles filled the air, and Stefan's ears flushed bright red.
Bravo!
Stella whispered, laughing.
What are you talking about?
Donovan snapped.
Everything was fine last month.
Where would you like me to start? Mildred asked with renewed confidence. If she could do nothing else, she would at least stand firm in the truth.
I believe crime is high because I found 6 letters from different coven leaders complaining about looting. Jobs seem to be scarce because half the people can't afford to pay their taxes. At least, that's what the ledgers from 5 years ago say. They've only been updated erratically and by different witches for the last 18 months. That's just the beginning. I can go into greater detail if you'd like. No!
Donovan stopped her as she reached for her thick scroll. His uncomfortable glare suggested that he expected her to take responsibility for the Middle Coven's years of neglect, something she refused to do.
What would you like me to report? Mildred asked. Do you want me to lie to you and tell you everything is fine when it clearly isn't?
A flicker of movement off to her left caught her eye. Evelyn sent her a bolstering smile. Mildred's courage grew again. She wasn't alone, for her friends always stood behind her.
I don't like you,
Donovan said, regarding her with distrust.
Not at all. You're
Oh, goodness. Some voices just take a little bit more. Regarding her with distrust.
Not at all. You're impertinent and lazy if you don't even know what's happening in your covens.
If you don't even know what's happening in your coven. I'm just making sure it's what I want. Yeah, it sounds fine. Sometimes it's clear in my voice, but not in my head.
I can't imagine it would take more than an hour or 2 to figure out the highlights.
Mildred said nothing, shocked at his severe disconnection from reality. Did he really believe that she could understand coven business in an hour? Or were the Middle Covens simply that disastrous? No wonder Porter... Hold on. Disastrous sounded funny to my ear. It's okay. Simply that disastrous. No wonder Porter worried about Donovan's reign without Nell. Donovan huffed.
I'm done hearing from you. You've bothered me, and I'm in a foul mood for my meeting. Get it straightened out by next month. Rand report.
Mildred slowly returned to her seat. She'd never really respected Donovan as high priest, despite his reputed skill with intricate spells. He always seemed to find the easy way out of a situation, pawn responsibilities off on others, and rely too heavily on his old knee injury as a crutch, instead of actually doing his job. But experiencing his laziness in person disappointed her so deeply that it felt like she'd woken from a dream, and realized her ideals had never been real.
Well done, Stefan hissed. Now you've gotten us both in trouble.
Mildred ignored him, and he eventually fell back to sleep. Stella sent her an empathetic little smile, but Mildred didn't have the energy to return it. Her goal of becoming an assistant had finally been realized, only she'd made a fool of herself, aligned with a council member that hated her, and become... That sounds wrong. She'd made a fool of herself, aligned with a council member that hated her, and became... I have become, but I think it should... And became an enemy. There we go. Sometimes I have to make little tweaks. Sometimes I have to make... Aligned with the council member that... Hold on, one more thing. Only she made a fool of herself, aligned... Okay, I need to start a little farther back. That's why I'm writing this wrong. Only she'd made a fool of herself, aligned with a council member that hated her, and became an enemy of the highest witch before the end of the day.
What a wonderful beginning,
she muttered. Yay! All right, chapter 22 down. I have an appointment in half an hour, so I think we have room for one more chapter. That chapter is really long. This is a long chapter. We probably won't have time for the whole thing. So I wonder if I did a later one. Okay, we're actually going to do chapter 25. So we're going to go a little bit. It's going to be very fun for you guys, huh? We'll just go ahead and start it, and we'll just finish it later the next time I hop on, probably tomorrow. So it's not completely out of order for all of you that are listening through the whole thing, mostly on YouTube. Mildred's Resistance. Okay, chapter 23. Here we go. Chapter 23. Leave me alone.
I didn't complete my network school education so I could fluff your pillows,
Mildred said 2 weeks later. She sat behind Stefan's desk, where the late evening light that slanted through his windows fell in warm rays.
I'm supposed to be conducting business, not taking off your shoes.
His dinner tray hovered in the air next to him, waiting to be eaten.
Can't eat like this, he said. I need to prop my feet up. There's an ottoman just across from you,
she said primly, casting her eyes on the clock to find it was well past 7.
Use that. Position it for me. No, that's an order. This is a refusal.
Mildred returned her attention back to the desk, which continued to be a destructive mess of paperwork and messages. She'd spent an hour organizing it that morning, only to... only to return after her lunch with Martin to find it cluttered with new messages. The tips of her fingers kneaded her temples in a poor attempt to remove a lingering headache.
My feet need a cushion,
Stefan insisted, rapping his side table with a fist.
Give me the ottoman. No.
He growled. The ottoman rested no more than 2 arms' lengths from his feet. He could easily move it with a spell. She would put Stefan to sleep with a nap to hex. The nap hex. Oh, thanks, Fly on the Wall. Welcome. I'm glad you're liking it. She would put Stefan to sleep with a nap hex to get some peace and quiet again, as she'd done yesterday, but she needed him to answer a few questions so she could leave and go to bed.
It's your job to make me comfortable,
he bellowed, turning red in the face like a toddler throwing a tantrum.
It's my job to figure out this blasted mess. Who's the coven leader for Stilton? I've sent at least 2 messages and haven't heard back.
Stefan folded his arms across his chest.
I can't answer any questions when I'm this uncomfortable and hungry, you shrew. You're nothing like the rest of them, you know. They used to do everything I said.
Mildred narrowed her bloodshot eyes on him.
Yes, and you ran them out after a month or 2. Now the middle covens are a disaster that won't be cleaned up by me taking care of you. You're perfectly capable of moving the ottoman. I'm an old man, he said with a pout in his lower lip. I shouldn't have to work. You should.
Mildred ignored him. In the end, however, she couldn't do anything more until she found out who ran Stilton Coven. She could find, not still. She could find no correspondences or record of fully paid taxes. Not that there were good records of anything else. She gritted her teeth and prepared herself by taking 5 long, deep breaths. Not even an all-girls school had challenged her patience or pride on this level. She walked over to stand in front of him.
Fine, she said through clenched teeth. I'll move your ottoman if you tell me about the coven leader for Stilton.
Stefan's eyes lit up in a triumphant smile.
Get to work, then,
he cried, flapping a hand.
If my dinner is cold, I'm sending for another tray and you'll regret it.
Mildred pulled the ottoman closer with a spell, but it ran into Stefan's toes.
Lift my feet onto it, he said. Absolutely not. The deal was to bring the ottoman to you. I did that. Now answer my question.
Stefan pressed his lips together and stared at her. She suppressed the urge to slap him, instead using a spell to jerk his legs into the air. They moved so quickly he nearly toppled backward. She shoved the ottoman underneath him. I almost said them. Like his legs. She shoved the ottoman underneath him with her foot, slammed his dinner tray onto his lap, and said,
"Who is the coven leader for Stilton?"
Stefan glared at her, frozen with surprise, until he slowly regained his composure. He stared at her with a smug expression of distaste.
"I don't know who the coven leader is. Last I knew it was a male, but that may have changed."
Mildred nearly exploded. She turned her back to him. She turned her back to him with her fists clenched, feeling her rage bloom into her face until it nearly overcame her. All for nothing.
"The soup is cold!"
he howled.
"Send it back right now!"
She stalked to the door and slipped into the empty hall, her composure shattered. Once in the cool, dark hall, illuminated by the occasional torch, she leaned back against the wall and released a deep breath. The injustice of her situation burned white-hot. How had she ended up with the most difficult witch on the council? Rand might be a lech, but at least he set expectations. I stumbled with set, so I'm going to redo it. With the most difficult witch on the council, Rand might be a lech, but at least he set expectations. She certainly wasn't wrong to deny Stefan so many ridiculous tasks. When it came to morals, she was rarely wrong. Rarely wrong. There we go. The wrong threw me off. Stefan, so many ridiculous tasks. When it came to morals, she was rarely wrong about anything. Her network education had nothing to do with nannying a tetchy old man. Her hand warmed when a new message came through the Solenda. It had been so long since she'd used it that the feeling... I gotta redo that part. Through the Solenda. It had been so long since she'd used it that the feeling startled her out of her oh my gosh. I said, I was going to say innate, but it's irate. It had been so long since she'd used it that the feeling startled her out of her irate depression.
"A moment to meet with you?"
the message inquired, showing Lavinia's quill between her knuckles. Just seeing Lavinia's symbol brought a fresh wave of guilt and panic.
"Classes," Mildred whispered, closing her eyes. "I've forgotten about classes."
She used silent magic to send a message back to Lavinia.
"Yes, come to Stefan's office." "On my way."
Mildred remained in the hall, listening to the distant sound of Stefan's demands for more soup until she could tolerate it no more, and said a silencing incantation on the doorway. Lavinia rushed down the hall at a run 5 minutes later, her thin cheeks flushed. "I'm sorry for the unexpected request, Miss Mildred," she said, panting. "But I just had to come see you."
"What's wrong?"
Lavinia's breathing calmed. She hesitated for just long enough that Mildred snapped at her.
"What? I'm very busy."
"Have you forgotten us?" Lavinia asked, looking like a cast-aside puppy. Mildred paused with a flash of shame and embarrassment.
"Of course not,"
she said. The lie burned on her tongue.
"I've been very busy."
"Yes, of course," Lavinia said, fidgeting with the bottom of her sleeves. "And I understand, but it's just that, aren't you going to stop classes?" I said aren't. It should be are.
"But are you going to stop classes? I only ask because we don't want to keep our hopes up that you'll come back if you aren't going to."
"I'm not sure." Lavinia's shoulders slumped in avid dejection.
"I haven't learned to transport yet,"
she mumbled, her eyes on the floor as she scuffed the toe of her boot back and forth.
"Or cleaning spells."
Mildred stared at her with a shrewd eye. Either Lavinia was trying to guilt her into coming back, or she truly felt this worried.
"If I say no, would you continue to learn on your own?"
"A few things," Lavinia said.
"I've already been doing that, but I can't learn to transport on my own."
"True." In the time that Mildred had been teaching, at least half of the servants learned to read, and possibly wrote letters or copied poems. It didn't seem unreasonable that they could continue learning on their own or teaching each other.
"No," Mildred thought. "They wouldn't teach it correctly. They need me to guide them."
The thought rose so suddenly that she stopped to analyze it. Did the students need her, as opposed to any other teacher? Or did she simply want to teach them? There was no doubt she longed for the easy days of the classroom compared to the hell of her current life.
"We miss you, Miss Mildred, not just the classes. We miss learning,"
Lavinia said, tucking her hands behind her.
"And I miss teaching,"
she thought. She actually missed her students, the dusty smell of chalk in the classroom, and the expressions of joy on the faces of those reading for the first time. Teaching had given her a sense of fulfillment and progression that she imagined working as assistant to Stefan could never give her. Not so long as she was pushing ottomans around, anyway.
"Blessed be," she muttered under her breath. "Lavinia, I appreciate you taking the time to communicate how you feel."
"Does that mean you'll teach us again?" Lavinia asked, breathless. "Will you come back? We want you back so badly. I have so many questions." Mildred's mind spun with the same question. But when could she fit classes in? Would she have the energy to teach after dealing with Stefan all day? She brushed that aside to ask the most pressing question.
"If all of the students have been so worried about learning, why haven't you contacted me through the Solenda?"
"I have," Lavinia said quietly. "But you never responded until tonight. That's why I ran all the way here."
"You have?"
"Many times, Miss Mildred."
"When?"
Mildred demanded, annoyed that she could be at fault in anything. She recalled ignoring 1 or 2 messages on the Solenda while dealing with the Middle Covens, but had she ignored so many? "Almost every day around lunch. I have questions about what I'm learning. The rest of the students won't contact you because they think you've moved on like the rest of them."
"The rest of them?"
Lavinia shrugged. Mildred schooled her face into a neutral expression. If she looked too stern, Lavinia would give up. The girl worried about Mildred's disapproval above all else. Mildred had felt the same way about her mother. It had been a wonderful motivator, so for Lavinia's sake she sought to never overapprove. "The rest of the witches that work at the castle don't think about the servants," Lavinia said. "To some of them, like Miss Evelyn and Councilmember Rand, we're hardly human. A lot of them say we shouldn't be educated."
"Really?"
Mildred murmured in surprise, recalling Porter's worry about the rise of elitism in the council.
"Who?"
"Rand said it to one of the fireboys when he caught him reading a news scroll. Evelyn makes remarks all the time about maids not needing to know how to read in order to do their jobs." Hello, everyone. I just thought I'd say hi really quick. Oh, thanks, Fly on the Wall. Thanks for the like. If you guys are liking it, give me a like. That's awesome. So fun to have you here. A worried stir moved through Mildred's chest at the thought of Evelyn. Refraining from educating the lower class was the highest form of elitism. Did her friend even realize the wave she was caught up in? Or was she simply riding the popular opinions of the day? Evelyn must not know. She couldn't. Evelyn was motivated, but tyrannical? No. Mildred refused to believe it and wondered where the elitism had begun.
"Lavinia, I must be honest with you. I simply cannot teach right now."
"Oh."
"I refuse to set up unrealistic expectations,"
Mildred said, folding her hands in front of her.
"I don't have time, but I shall teach again within the next few months when I figure out my job."
"All right." Lavinia's voice had shrunk, as if it curled away into a small place inside of her. Mildred felt a stab of guilt and then annoyance. She simply couldn't take on teaching, not even if she missed it.
"I shall contact you as soon as I'm able,"
Mildred said, hardening her heart against Lavinia's despondent face. "Thank you, Assistant Mildred," Lavinia said, her pointy chin drawn up. She avoided meeting Mildred's eyes. "I appreciate your time." Oh, I shouldn't have rolled that R. It's a wrong accent. Lavinia said. She avoided meeting Mildred's eyes. "I appreciate your time." Resisting Lavinia's wretched expression and the subtle accusation laced in the word assistant wasn't as easy as Mildred hoped.
"The elitists are now making it known that they don't want education for the lower classes,"
she thought with a grim shudder as Lavinia departed without another word.
"If they keep growing, they will eventually divide the council."
The incantation around Stefan's office should have faded, so when no sounds came from within, she cracked open the door to find him asleep in his chair, soup dribbling down his chin and onto his shirt. The bowl was half empty. With a sigh of relief, she closed the door and transported to her room.
"Let him wake up in the middle of the night."
Let him wake up in the middle of the night. Hold on. I think I found a little... Oh, wait. There we go. I found a mistake. Hold on, I gotta find... Sorry, you guys. I gotta find my spot. Transported to her room. Okay. All right. There was a spelling mistake that I hadn't noticed. I just had to fix really quick. It takes a little minute. Hey, everybody.
Let him wake up in the middle of the night and go to bed himself,
she thought, settling on the side of her bed. Removing her tight boots felt wonderful, and she massaged the sore muscles of her feet. Her conversation with Lavinia floated hazily through her mind.
I have questions about learning. A lot of them say we shouldn't be educated.
The thought of elitism amongst the council made her sick. Open sentiments against education? It was nothing but passive oppression. Passive oppression. Oh, thanks for all the hearts, you guys. Open sentiments against education? It was nothing but passive oppression based on financial status. She stopped rubbing her foot to stare at a spot on the floor.
They must be stopped,
Mildred whispered, with the burn of a small, righteous spark within.
Or at the very least averted. I can teach.
With a sigh, Mildred sent a message to Lavinia through the Solenda.
Meet me before breakfast. I have decided to resume classes immediately.
The jostling of the carriage and the privacy it afforded soothed Mildred's frazzled nerves. Because she'd never been to the Middle Covens, she couldn't safely transport to meet the Coven leaders. So for a few hours, while she rode alone down the central highway in a carriage, she closed her eyes, let her mind go blank, and enjoyed thinking of nothing. Her first month as assistant had passed in a blur of paperwork, boundary lines, and classes. Evelyn came and went, kept busy by her new life as council member, leaving Stella and Mildred's main crutch to lean on. Hold on, that sounded funny. I said Stella and Mildred, not Stella as Mildred's, and that makes all the difference. Leaving Stella as Mildred's main crutch to lean on, dinner with Martin remained her only anchor of normalcy. No one else. No one could draw. It's no one else. Remained her only anchor of normalcy. No one else could draw her into a meaningful discussion about her day, and she looked forward to sharing her thoughts with him. His gentle ways and dark eyes had a calming effect on her. Stefan, little more than a thunderous gray cloud sitting near the fire, emitted occasional rumblings while Mildred worked frantically. They existed in a mostly tolerant silence, ignoring each other except for when she insisted he answer her questions. When Stefan became stubborn, Porter attempted to help. Fed up with not knowing the identities of the Coven leaders, or even the locations of Coven boundaries, she packed her valise and declared,
I'll be visiting the Covens for the next couple of days, Stefan. Try not to kill anyone. Next couple of days, Stefan. Try not to kill anyone with your apathy while I'm gone.
He grunted and turned a page in his book. A small coven at the border of the Ashley Covens and the Middle Covens was Mildred's first stop. For all the prosperity at the heart of Ashley City, rampant poverty ran through the rest of her vineyards, spilling south into the farming lands of the Middle Covens.
Stop here,
Mildred called to the driver when a worn shack appeared off to the left. Smoke billowed from a rickety brick chimney, matching the fog that crept along the forest floor. Leadham wood had nearly engulfed the dilapidated structure in boughs and... Oh my gosh, this is it. This is the moment. I always say boughs wrong. I say bows and it's boughs. So I have to check. I'm pretty sure it's boughs, but I have to check. Boughs. Yes, got it right. I'm always fixing this. Always. Okay, boughs. I always say bows. Leadham wood had nearly engulfed the dilapidated structure in boughs and deadwood.
Here?
The driver asked.
You can't be serious. I'm always serious.
I'll wait right here, he said with a note of warning in his tone, keeping his wary gaze on the dead scrub oak. Mildred rolled her eyes and opened the door. If there was any danger, it certainly wouldn't lurk in the trees. It would come from the frightening hut she was about to approach. Setting aside her fears, she strode up to the shanty and rapped on the door. Several loud thumps came from inside just before the door opened a crack.
What do you want?
A deep voice growled.
I want to speak to the Coven leader.
An awkward... All right. My dog just got sick all over my bed. Lovely. And I actually have to go to a meeting anyway. So I'm going to pause this chapter here, and I'll probably get back on tonight. I don't know why this is turning me blue. I'll get back on tonight to finish, or actually maybe in a little bit to finish this chapter, but it'll all be up on YouTube. Thank you all for coming. So fun to have so many of you. And I'll be back here soon. Fly on the wall. Thanks for all the love. So many hearts. See you guys.